Welcome to the Casey Catch Up. This week we chatted to Michael Booth. He was actually in hotel quarantine after a pretty successful campaign racing his stand-up paddleboard over in Europe. We talked to him about his learning progression on the foil and how it was something that didn't come naturally to him, and how it was a really good thing for him when the SUP racing stuff stopped last year with all the COVID craziness. We also talked about the future of foiling and also SUP racing, and we go into our experiences with Molokai to Oahu on the SUP unlimited boards as the SUP foils went past us. We discussed that and sort of got into a bit of a discussion on our race strategies for that on the SUP, which is pretty cool. While this one isn't 100% foil downwind, it is a lot downwind, a lot SUP racing, and towards the end, it does get into the future of both SUP and foil racing and where that's going to go and how it's going to evolve. Something you might have also noticed is I'm not posting every week for the Casey Catch Up now. I'm trying to do it fortnightly. So every 2 weeks I'll be releasing a new episode. That's just because I've been working on a few other things. New website, new surf foil module coming up, and just trying to get everything a bit more rounded and polished so that the experience for the Coach Casey Club members is a better one. So if you're liking these videos, subscribe. If you're looking to get more coaching, head to caseyaus.com and look at the Coach Casey Club and have a look at that. But yeah, thanks for tuning in and enjoy this chat with Michael Booth.
So welcome to the Casey Catch Up. We've got Michael Booth, a good mate of mine and competitor and rival, I guess, but it's been epic to sort of, I guess, we've sort of followed the same journey in a lot of ways. He's multiple world champ. We had a really good battle in Molokai to Oahu when Kai and Jeffrey zoomed past us on the foils. But yeah, Boothy, stoked to have you on. And currently in quarantine after a successful campaign overseas. So first of all, well done on that. And do you want to give a little recap on your trip that you just had?
Yeah, thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure to obviously firstly come on the podcast, but be racing against you and sort of being the rival that we have been for a long time, but always nice to catch up. As far as the trip went, yeah, it was great. I guess in a snapshot, we had a lot of good clinics. SUP seems to be an amazing spot in Europe. I had a few good races. Probably had one race that I wasn't so super stoked with, but that happens sometimes. And but overall, just happy to be back racing, like feeling like just grateful to be able to do that again after what was basically a 2-year forced break, which is what a lot of us wouldn't have thought when we were going around in 2019. So yeah, just excited to get back. But the quarantine now, 2 weeks, has been not super exciting, but also really good because I was so busy for that sort of 5-week period when I was traveling and moving around and racing and doing clinics. I went to 8 different countries and I don't know, just over 5 weeks, I think it was, and just bouncing around and seeing what was possible again with the travel restrictions that we're so used to here in Australia. You sort of realize how differently different countries are taking the pandemic as well. But yeah, also super stoked on foiling, I guess, which is what the main topic, I guess, of this podcast is.
Yeah, and it's just a chat, and it's about, like, I'm using it. We spoke before, but I'm using it because I'm in lockdown. It's a good way to connect with people that I haven't seen in a long time. I think the last time I saw you was Aussie titles in Victoria. I think I saw you briefly. Like, we didn't even race against each other because you were off and I was in San Fran for the Red Bull event, and we kind of like.
No. We saw each other at 12 Towers in April.
Oh, 12 Towers, of course. Yeah, I didn't see you. You're too far ahead. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's right. That's almost seems like a distant memory now. It's been a lot's going on, but also not a lot's going on. And I was actually really stoked to watch you race over in Europe because it's like I was rooting for you because usually I'm against you. And it's like, no. If Boothy's going to beat everyone over there, then I know that at least I'm not super unfit because you flogged me in the distance race. But yeah, just for people that didn't watch, and from what I saw, it looks like you won every race except for the ICF, which is probably the one that you really wanted to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I was. It looks like board choice for you. Again, this is not fully foiling, but it's it's cool to see you own that too. Like, I watched your little sort of bit of debrief, and that was cool to, even the pros make mistakes, and owning it and learning from it. Every race is a different experience. So yeah, that was
Yeah,
cool
I
to
think for
see.
me, for that situation was, I had a new board. Like, it was obviously lighter than what I'd normally raced against. It was faster than what I normally paddle on, so I was definitely keen on it. But I think limited experience on the board was also a factor. Fin choice, also I was using like a weed fin because the lake was really weedy,
Mm-hmm.
and so I wanted to use a bigger fin, but I didn't want to use the bigger fin because, yes, it will give you more stability, but B, there was just so much like really long string weed. So if you get that caught on your fin or
Like, yeah,
on your foil, you're like, or whatever
yeah.
it is, you just go nowhere. So I went with the really small fin, but the next weekend I went with a massive fin. Like, I went with I tried out the 37 and I used that one, but I reckon the 44 would almost be better in those messier conditions, which I never thought I'd say, but just for that board and that type, and then working out where to stand on the board, I just hadn't done enough. Like, just one of those pandemic problems, I guess, with the shipping delays. So I got my board, was supposed to arrive in March, and then it got delayed, and then eventually arrived in Queensland, I think at the end of July. And then Richard Richard said he was driving across, but then he was like 4 weeks late. And then by the time I actually got the board to train on for Worlds, it arrived a week after I'd already arrived in Europe. So one of those sort of problems, but you just have to deal with it. You have to own it. Unfortunately, I just had never been in windy conditions on that board. There was a bit of a wind line off the beach, and most of the time when we were there, it was dead flat. But when the race happened, it was windy, and I had another board up the top. But I sort of analysed the whole performance when I finished, and I was like, well, with the information that I had before the race, I wouldn't have made a different decision if I had my time again. So obviously, now that I have the hindsight, maybe I could, but in that situation, I couldn't have. So I had to own it and just go, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Yeah, and I liked that the next week you kind of had a rematch with the guy who won gold, and you got him, which I was like, yeah, Ruthie, that was good. So well done.
Yeah, it was really cool to have Titouan there to race him, and I think more so just for my own personal
for sure.
mindset, because now I don't know when I'm going to race again, right? Like, it seems like boards are opening up and stuff. Maybe early next year we can get back overseas and start doing somewhat of a normal calendar. So for me, I think I would have stewed on it a little bit more, which sometimes is good, because if you're stewing on it, then you're so motivated for such a long period of time. But because I won in Prague and I won in Denmark, didn't have the best performance. So I was pretty happy with my sprinting performance, even though I had a fall in the final. Like, I was pretty happy to be in there. So I knew I was paddling well. And then to win again in Montenegro against, I guess, the informed guy in the world at the moment, Titouan Puyol, was just really nice for me.
Yeah, would have been, I guess, it would have made you definitely a happier flight home than, as I said, you would have been stewing on it. So it's always, like you say, a big loss makes you train harder. And if you win too many things, it's sort of makes you a little bit, you sort of relax a little. Speaking on making things harder, downwind sup foiling. Let's get into the foil chat. And I know that it wasn't completely easy learning to sup foil. Obviously, for those that don't know, like I said earlier, Michael is a very good sup paddler full stop, like anything paddling, and he's a beast. So the fact that I think a lot of people will take a bit of the fact that you had a hard time will make them feel better, I guess, or maybe it won't, because the power and speed you can generate to get your board moving is so important. Do you want to just give us a little snapshot of your learning to foil and learning to downwind foil process?
Well, I think I started downwind foiling because that was more my thing. Like, I like downwinding, and in Perth, you've got the doctor coming in, or the southwesterly breeze coming down the coast almost most days in summer. So I've done a lot of downwinding on the surf ski and on the SUP, and it was like, okay, well, this is the next thing. Everyone's doing it. Why not get involved? And I retrofitted like a tuttle box into my, like, I think it must have been an 8.2 or a 7.8 Hypernut, one of those starboard SUPs.
Yeah.
And I had the GoFoil maybe 65 mast with the 280 Maliko or something like that.
Yeah.
That was what I first started on. I tried to do the 200 and I found that really hard. So I went to the 280, and obviously you get up, but you go really slow. So you almost go so slow that you stop.
Yeah. So tell us about that, because that's something that a lot of people have been talking about lately. They're learning to get up. And then once they're up, they're like, the foil is so slow. Like, how would you ever link bumps? But from my experience, the 280, yes, it's super slow compared to other foils. It's still faster than a ski. It's still faster than a sup, but it's all relative.
Well, it's all a matter of perspective. Like if you look at something like SUP and we sort of can go, I don't know, downwards towards that 330 on really good kilometers and then holding under 4 minutes on our unlimiteds. But when you're talking about foiling, you're like, okay, well, if I'm not going under 3, I'm like super slow. But it's like, well, it depends because you've got some guys like Nathan, who in Perth, who doesn't like really going fast. Like but Marcus likes going really fast. So Nathan just wants to surf the whole time, and Marcus wants to go fast. And Marcus thinks, and they both can't really get each other's mentality because one comes from a racing background, from like sailing and SUP racing and all that different sports, whereas one comes from like a surfing background, which is so different. So what we're trying to do, I guess, in different reasoning is all different. But for me, I always want to go fast. So for me, getting up on a 280, you have to find where the bumps are. You have to understand where they're coming from, and coming from I guess a displacement hull background with the surf ski and the stand up, you're used to sort of coming down the run and trimming the board or the ski in certain ways. You've got to kind of relearn it and sit a lot higher, and you're searching for things that you definitely couldn't get on the other craft. So it's a different learning experience the whole time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just then what you said, like sitting higher on the bump is such a, for those that already have a downwind paddling experience, is something that I know when I was learning myself and then watching Marcus learn over in Maui, he'd always bomb down and then sit low, because when we're on those longer crafts, 14 foot or 18 foot boards or skis, your nose wants to be at the back. So you're sitting lower in the trough, but your tail is up high. Whereas on a SUP foil board, the boards are only like, you started on like something around 8 foot. Everyone's gone towards 6 foot now, and half the length, and you're only on the foil. So you've got to be where your tail was. So that is definitely a learning process that I think we all have to go through, especially like, oh, I already downwind, I know how to do it. It's like, well, it's a little bit different even on the foil, even if you have the experience.
Well, to give you an example, and to those people out there who are trying to learn how to downwind foil, like I've done a little bit of the wing dinging, but I did mostly do the downwind foil. So it was quite interesting, even talking to Marcus again, because we sort of hang out a lot, and he obviously helped me a lot with my foiling. We were talking initially about when the dinging came along, I was like, well, what do I want the ding for? Because I can paddle into the thing. And he's like, well, you've learnt the hardest way to do it, so you don't really want to go back to the easier way to go downwind, because once you get up, it's same as the board. Like it's kind of like the wheels before takeoff. Like your board is only big enough so you can get up, and then you kind of don't want the board anymore. If you could just have straps on a pole, and that's all you'd need. So it's the same thing with the dinging. I didn't really get into that too much because I liked just downwinding, and I know wind sport wasn't really my thing. But there is different reasoning. But going back to like how hard it is. So when I first started, I remember my first paddleback, because I'm one of those people who just go out and have a crack and just kill myself until I eventually get it.
Happy to suffer. Yeah,
happy to suffer. So I do like a free ode to City Beach, which is about 12 kilometers, and I would take about, I think my first one was an hour and 48 minutes or something I took, and it was just like trying to power up, get up, and then not really know what to do, and then come down, fall, and then you get to like 40 minutes, and I was like, well, I have to go to bed because that's where I have to finish. So I just exhaust myself and eventually end up paddling a lot of the way back. But you eventually saw those times decreasing to around that 30-minute mark. So it's just that time, persistence, and having the ability to just, I don't know, be happy to enjoy that learning journey.
I think that's exactly right. And you've got to enjoy the new skills that you're learning. And I know even myself learning to wing, a similar thing. I didn't learn it straight away. It's like learning the skill. I enjoyed being shit at it. Like I liked that I was really bad at the start, and the fact that each week I'm like, oh, I'm getting better at this, and there's a wind coming, I can practice it again, and as you up your skills, it's a good feeling, I guess. And it's same as like when we paddle our race boards and we're getting quicker, getting fitter, getting stronger. That's a good feeling. And then when you get less fit, it's like, oh, it's not so good. So then you might shift your focus into something else. And I guess that's something that I was chatting to Marcus earlier actually, and he was saying that 2 years ago you were really doing a lot of the SUP foil stuff, and then this year, because you're traveling, or you did travel for races, and obviously a lot more stuff going on at home, you were paddling more your race board and less time on the foil board, which, because you've learned it, and you've got to a level that you're happy with, you're kind of like, okay, I can tick that one off, and if I want to go back to it, I can. But I guess, have you played around with much, like obviously starting with the Maliko 280, tell us about your progression from there, and I guess as you got faster and start the foil the whole way down the runs, like what equipment changes and that sort of stuff.
I think I ended up going to one of the starboard hyperfoils. And yeah, I definitely haven't done as much as other people. Like I'm somebody who loves that beginning process. Like I love being a beginner and learning something, like whether you go snowboarding or skiing or foiling or surfing or whatever it is. Like I like to have the skill to be able to go and do anything or any sport with somebody else. Like even golf, I think golf took over a little bit last year as well, because you know, I was just trying to learn a different thing, and a few people I knew were doing it. So I love being a beginner, like you spoke about as well. Like it's a cool process because you can get better like exponentially. And then you get to that point where you kind of plateau, and it's like, okay, so what am I doing this for? Are there things that I'm going to go see? Like, do I enjoy it more than I enjoy the other sports? Do I don't know, what else can I learn? But as far as foils go, I definitely went to a longer mast, because after that I went to the starboard foils, and I was using like a 75 mast, and then like it was 82, I think, with the attachment, and then they were getting sort of better with their foils, and I was using a lot of prototypes, like by Tiesda, and I can't remember what we called it, but it was the one that Zane used to, I think he won the Maui to Molokai with it one year. And that was a lot faster. Like I was sort of getting around that 230 mark with a lot of my kilometers, and averaging under like 240 for a kilometer, which I guess is just under that 20 kilometer an hour mark, or just over.
Probably closer to 22s or 3s, I reckon. Yeah, that's getting quick.
I was pretty happy with that, but then it's like it kind of became like Formula One, right? Like you've got to be on the best gear, you've got to be constantly updating, you got to like do that. But then it was like, okay, but what am I doing that for? Like, am I really going to nose an extra kilometer or an extra 0.5 down the Perth coastline? Not really, because it's a matter of perspective. Like, and how am I enjoying this? Because I come from a background where I like the physicality of sports. I like being fit. I like, you know, when I finish an hour of a workout, I like that feeling. So the better you got, the easier it was. Like, obviously, you had to be more skillful. You had to make quicker decisions, but that also had to become more natural. So I think that's where I kind of lost it a little bit, because I was like, okay, well, we're not kind of racing. We're not, like, we're just doing it for fun. It's like, okay, well, because I've got a lot of other things going on, I kind of had to take my focus back to that.
And it's a fair chunk of time, a downwind foil. Like if you're doing the whole process in under an hour and a half, like that's pretty good. Like, that's pretty well organized.
Yeah, but then you also enjoy the process of going slower. I actually found that, like, when I got back on my SUP or something like that, I was like, okay, well, if I drive half an hour down the coast, it takes me like 45 minutes to an hour to get back. Whereas if I do it on a foil, it takes like 20 minutes.
I know.
Like, damn, I got to like do another one. And like the drive is like double the time of the paddle.
Yeah, I totally, I'm the same. Like a normal run was 12Ks, Avalon to Brownwater. And now, especially last year, I was going to Palm Beach and trying to finish it at Manly, just so I have to go to get an hour of time. Like on a SUP would be 12Ks, on a foil it's 24Ks. You know, it's literally, that's the difference. It's now become, for all the logistics, it's kind of like, well, as you said, if I want to get fit, foiling for 20 minutes down the coast, it's anaerobic, but it's 20 minutes. Whereas paddling on a SUP, it's also like anaerobic when we're downwind, but it's only for a longer time. So you get, fitness wise, you're going to get stronger, and time management. And it's like, I did a run the other day, just a prone downwind foil from Narrabeen back to Colorado. It's like 3 or 4 kilometers. And Lana picked me up, and I went with a few mates, and she's like, so how long were you actually foiling for? And it was, I think we measured it, and I was actually out on the water for 15 minutes, and like from start to finish. And the logistics involved, it took us an hour and a half, you know? So it's like, it's just, you're not going to be doing that. That's going to wear on you eventually. And especially for someone like yourself and me as well, like you want to get fitter. And there's a point where if you're not racing someone and not trying to get quicker, and, you know, if we're stuck in the one spot, you know, who are we racing? And like Nathan and Marcus. Like Marcus is trying to go as fast as he can, and Nathan's surfing. Maybe surfing's the better option, but still, it's not like you're getting a sweat on like you would paddling.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I guess it's like based around the user and based around what the person wants to achieve out of it. But it's for me, it was always like it got to the point where I was like, okay, when I was first starting out, it was a real work. It was the hardest workout in the world. Like I was like looking at my heart rates, I was like, oh my God, like I can't go any harder this time. I felt like I got better at sprinting after doing that foiling stuff because it was just so hard to pull myself out of the water. I just had to practice it so much, whereas I'd never do that normally because I'd always focus on the distance racing. So that was an added benefit, I guess.
That's why you got better at sprinting.
Yeah, I reckon it was, honestly. Like I remember Olivia Piana said the same thing after she won the 200 at the ICF in China in 2019. She's like, oh, I was just foiling heaps and I was like learning, so I had to sprint a lot to get the foil up, and then then I won a sprint. It was kind of random, and I was like, yeah, I kind of relate. Like I'm not winning sprints, but I definitely got better.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's cross training. In a sick, it's real resistance training when you're not getting up, that's for sure. Tell us about some of these new starboard foils that you were testing, because I guess I haven't seen a lot of them around, but I've, the times are obviously quick. Marcus, I was chatting to Marcus when you had some of the new stuff, and he said that you were going so fast down the coast. Like when you were up and going, he said you were going so quick, but he said you were making a couple of mistakes. That was the only reason he caught you up.
Yeah, well, I think when we were going together, I can't remember what the prototype I was using, but I ended up going back to like the newer starboard one. So we had the E-Type 1700 and the E-Type 1300, and that's where I'd consistently average around that like just under that 240 mark. I'd go a little bit faster, a little bit slower. The 1700 was probably like 5 seconds a K slower, but obviously a lot easier to stay high. But when you get faster, it was like a lot harder to keep down. That was kind of the issue. And then you've kind of got that trim tab at the back when I was using like the 250. But what was cool about the starboard ones, like once I set it up, like especially to the trim at the back, like you could obviously go further back for more lift or further forward for less lift. But once I screwed that in, I'd only have to really push it in and then screw one hole for like the rear, the tail. And then it was only one hole for the front. So that was something I liked because I had those like, I don't know what you call them, like jaws that open up. And I found that then I put an extra screw in just because I was like, maybe I'd rather keep it and make sure it's safe. But for me, I really liked that because it was just less screwing. I remember when I was first starting out, like I was just like far out, like unless I kept the foil on, it'd just be like I think it was like 4 screws top and bottom, especially even with the starboard ones at the beginning. It was like, it was like 10 screws to get started. It was just like so much of turning. I got a drill and like, it was too much for me. It was too much setup.
Yeah, I went for a shortboard surf the other day, and I felt like I'd forgotten something. I literally just grabbed my board, went for a surf, came back, and I'm like, where's my paddle? Where's my screwdriver? Where's the bolts? Where's the like front wing, back wing? And I've been doing lots of winging as well. And it's like, you got your foil set up, you got your leg ropes, you got to pump your wing up. And it's like, maybe I'm making this too complicated, but it's it's good to take it back.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing going from even stand up, because stand up was just like you have your board and your roof. And it's like you have to tie it on or whatever. But then when you get to the water, you just take it off and you get in the water. And then I was really not used to the whole like setting up, or like especially when you went like dinging. And when I was learning down at there's that point there just across from Cottesloe. I always forget the name of it, but a lot of guys are dinging there in Perth, and I go down there and it takes me like 40 minutes to get there. Then I get there, then I'd take like 20 minutes to set up. And then I get on. And I was like,
and then you're 20 minutes to pack down, and then another 40 minutes to get home. Yeah.
And I'd end up driving home in traffic every time as well. And I was just like, I can't do this.
I'm not sure this is for me. Yeah, it definitely, there becomes a line where it's like, all right, as you said, how much do I want to do this? Like, and that's, I'm sure a lot of people downwind foiling, and you being, someone who likes to suffer, probably by the sounds of it, you enjoyed the learning process more than, maybe not more than, but you enjoyed the workout of the learning process a lot. And then once you got it, you're like, well, this is...
Yeah, well, it was the workout, but then it was also the ability to learn and get better at something and to improve. That's what I really enjoyed doing. It was really about that. And then once I kind of got to a level, like I'm nowhere near the level of like some of the things that I see people doing now, like people are jumping and going super fast. But I guess like the main thing at the moment seems to be the dinging stuff. And I didn't really get into that. But yeah, it's pretty incredible to see the progression and to see how much everybody's improving all the time. But yeah, I think once it gets a little bit more established and there's some sort of pathway, I think I'll get
Yeah,
more into it. Whereas now it's just kind of like free foiling or free surfing
yeah,
essentially. So it's not really someone who I've been my whole life. Like I've always competed or raced or, you know,
yeah.
had a
With the
goal to
goal in
achieve.
mind. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I totally get that. How much did you like? How much dinging have you done? Are you dinging? Like, do you have a ding? Are you still going out and you?
Yeah, so I have that Air Rush starboard one that they brought out. I have one of those at 4 meters and one of those at 5 meters.
Mhm.
The 4 meter one's the one that I learnt with and did a lot with. Like I went up with Marcus to Exmouth last year, and I really kind of learnt how to go out and back, and was doing jibes. Was trying to learn tacks and never really got that. But for me, once I had learned how to go out and back, I was like, okay, well, where to next? Like I don't really want to jump because if I jump, there's like potential for injury, which could affect
Yeah,
all the other stuff that I'm doing. So I don't really want to do that. So
yeah.
where do I kind of go from here? And that's kind of where I went, okay, I don't really want to do it anymore.
I totally
Yeah.
like. I was just chatting to, as I said, I was chatting to Marcus before, and he's just landed his first 360, so sort of up into the wind, spinning
Yeah.
towards it. And I said to him, like, why? I was like, what's the point? And like, I'm probably similar to you. I don't want to injure myself doing a jump or damage gear and it's just, I've never been a freestyle guy, even surfing, the sup racing, obviously there's not much freestyle in sup racing.
Yeah.
Not doing any airs. I've never been an air guy, and I respect and am amazed at what people are doing now. It's crazy, like the backflips and double backflips and front flips is just wow. But do I want to do it? I don't know. At the moment, the answer is no. I don't even have straps on my boards. So it's like I'm happy to just stay on the wave and sort of do turns. And what I was going to say is the two things. One, wing wave riding is epic. That's something that I love doing. And I think there's a few spots in WA. I'd imagine off off the Centaur marker, there's a few reefs out there, aren't there, that you can.
Yeah. So off Hillary's, you can go out to the islands
Hillary's.
off the
Yeah.
Seal Island and that type of thing. So that would be a good spot to do it. But um, I don't know, you kind of just end up getting sucked into going downwinding when the wind's up. So it's
Yeah.
one of those things.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I guess something that'll make you, if you want the challenge, winging upwind is hard on the forearms. Like I'm probably going to get myself a harness, but if you wing
Yeah.
upwind and then do your downwinder, it's kind of an time efficient downwinder. Like, on a sup or a ski, you can paddle upwind and then paddle back down. I guess the equivalent for foiling is winging, sailing upwind, tacking or jibing up. And then I've been doing the deflate, and you can either deflate and paddle up or deflate and just hope you don't come down and pump back up if
So
you
do
do.
you sling your paddle over your shoulder like Dave Kalama and then ding into it and then deflate and then do it, or you deflate as you're going?
So originally I was dinging upwind, and then I'd actually just sit down, pack everything up, put it into a backpack, and then paddle out of the sling or backpack.
Yeah.
And I was just paddling up with the wet wing in the backpack, deflated. And then one day it clicked. I'm like, why didn't I just deflate while I'm going? Because I was already up and foiling. So I just deflated it and just sort of, had it, like wrapped it up under my arm, and I had the paddle on my back still. And I'm like, if I don't come down, I won't need the paddle. So I just kept going. And then the next time I went out, and I'm like, I'm going to try pump up. If I come down, I'm going to use the kite pump or the wing pump to get it up going again. And it worked. Not like it worked. I could pump up in the water, and it wasn't. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's fun, but it's possible. So it was, for me, it was a cool. I got a light bulb moment. Okay, when we're downwind, we don't need a paddle. We need to use something to chip in. And so obviously the paddle to me and you is pretty second nature. We know how that works, but there's a lot of people, winging's boomed. I know in Perth especially, but everywhere it seems like winging's booming, and lots of people want to learn to downwind. And free winging, as you know, it's kind of like taking a step backwards. So deflating it, you're doing the same thing all of a sudden because the wing's not, getting in your way like this. So
that was the thing that I learned. I went and did a downwinder on like a northerly, and I wasn't like super good at this stage. Like I couldn't really go out and back properly, and it was really light winds. We all like struggled. I think it was like myself, Mick, Marcus, and Nathan, and geez, it was like really light winds. I only had a 4 meter at that stage. So like
Mm.
I had like the free wing version 1, and then I've got the free wing version 2, but like in the 5 meter now. So like it's better for that around that 12 knots.
Mhm.
Whereas the 4 meter is kind of only really good once you get over 15 to
15,
18,
yeah.
or like you can sort of, because once you're up, you're fine, but it's just getting
Up. That's I totally agree. Getting up is the pain in the ass, and it's especially
So
here
you
in
got
Sydney.
better. You get better at like pumping it and like using the kite. And I was never doing it a lot like some of the other people who were just obsessed with it. Like
Yeah.
I've met a few people now, and it's like they've just gone from everything else. They just cancelled everything else, and they're just doing wing digging now, which is great, I guess, if they're really enjoying it and they're getting out in the water, that's what they want to do. But yeah, we're going back and forth. It was just like a nightmare. I was like, I just didn't enjoy that. That sucked.
Yeah, to me, like when I used to kite surf too, and I was always kite surfing to get to the waves when it's windy, and it's a means to surf the waves when the wind is strong. For me, the winging, it's the same thing. It's a means to surf the waves or the bumps when the wind is strong. And the guys that just go out and back, cool if that's what you enjoy. But to me, like me and my family, like my dad and brother, we'd say, oh, those guys are mowing the lawn. They're just going up and back and up and back. And it's like, that's cool, but it's not for me. It's not something that I want to do. I'd prefer to paddle up and back. At least I get fit. Whereas sailing, I feel like I'm not getting much out of it except for a 4-round pump.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I had that same experience and that same thought process when I was down in Perth, and I was at that. I'm trying to find it now on the map actually, and it's down in Point Walter. So it's like where a lot of the guys go on the Swan River. And I was going out and back, and as you said, like it's a good kind of analogy mowing the lawn. Like I literally just going out and back, and I was just trying to go as fast as I can upwind and as fast as I can back along the wind. And it got to the point where I saw the guys at the King of the Cuts, and there was heaps of wingers doing it. And then like I was going down, and I was surfing on my unlimited, and I looked across, and they're just like powered on and just going hard the whole way. And I was just like, I don't know. That's just not me. Like I think it's awesome that guys love that, but for me, I was just like, I don't know what's going on here. Like it just doesn't
it's not downwinding. It's not the mountain bike track that I guess you and I, like it's downwind to me is it's an ever changing, valleys and troughs and peaks, and you're trying to pick the right way. It's like a maze. And to go faster, sometimes you got to paddle harder, but sometimes you don't have to paddle harder. It's that little bit of finesse, but it's cool that it's that little bit of both. Whereas just like I call it power digging, the guys just like sheeting in on the biggest wing they've got, and they're just going they're almost.
But that's also incredible. Like in the windsurfing, when you see those guys. I met one guy at one of the clinics when I did in Sweden, Mick, and he was a power windsurfer, and like he gets like top speeds being, I don't know like what it is. It must have been like 60 kilometers an hour or something.
Crazy, yeah.
And they're just powered on, just going super hard. And you watch some of their videos, which is crazy. Like, and it's also cool too. But just not me.
I'm the same. It's just I don't. To me, they're relying on certain conditions to get that that max speed that they're after, that 60 k's per hour. My boss, when I used to work for Weather Zone, he was a windsurfer and he loved the speed stuff. He punctured a lung on Sydney Harbour going so fast. He just had this big wipeout and just everywhere. And he nearly died because he was going so fast in a high speed crash. He just bounced along the water. Absolute madman. But he nearly lost his life doing it, which crazy. But I guess everything's risky. But to me, I'm similar to you in that going fast in a straight line, it's F1. And like we just touched on before, like the different equipment makes such a big difference. So I don't know. Why don't we talk about that? Like the different speeds that I guess you found you were going downwind just from changing foils or boards or paddle sizes. So what size board are you using now, and what size foil and paddle as well?
So I think I'm using the 5.8 Hyperfoil now. So it's a lot smaller than what I originally started with. But what you saw was the boards got thicker. Originally they were obviously quite thin, and they were made for surfing, and you're retrofitting things in because you're just trying to like, I don't know, get involved with the newest thing. But I found that I went for like a shorter board, thicker base, something that obviously has the foil that's going to go straight down. Obviously originally we were having that sort of kickback angle because of the surfing, so everybody sort of fixed that up pretty quickly. Having that 75 mass, and then basically always using the 1300 or the 1700 E-type. But the fastest foil I've been on was actually the 1500 X type, which is like a starboard wing. That's actually I don't know if they have it in stock anymore, but it's the main sort of winging
Okay. Yeah.
one that they use. They have the 1100 X type, and I was using the 1500 for downwinding, and that was definitely my fastest foil by far. Like that would easily be hitting that like 2 minutes 30 as long as I wasn't getting weed like consistently. I could bang that out as long as I wasn't making mistakes, which is something that I was definitely doing because I wasn't out there every day honing my skills. But the cool progression was just going fast. And like you're talking about like that guy punching his lung when he was on Sydney Harbour. I've had some falls on the foil, especially around North Beach, like in between Trig and Sorrento in Perth,
Yeah,
where the swell sort of comes in a little bit more. And it's about, I reckon I've hit like about 30 clicks or something like that around that period, and had big falls coming off the top. And I like winded myself and like felt like I sort of almost could knock myself out at that speed, you know?
Yeah,
Because you're coming down fast and like you're trying to trim properly, especially on the problem is when you're on the bigger wing. So like when I was originally going hard, like I was on the 2000 and say Marcus was on like the 1700 at that point. And because I'm like an 80 kilo guy, I can't really go on what like say like the Spencer brothers are on, who are like under 70 kilos and that type of thing. Because it's a lot easier. Then you'd have the same sort of thing. I think.
Yeah.
You're obviously a lot better than me, but you would have that same issue getting it out of the water.
We need windier conditions to keep up with those boys. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when I had falls on that, because you're constantly pushing, and then the faster you get, the more lift and the more the thing is like, and it becomes such a fine line between coming off and making a mistake or maintaining that awesome speed, because you kind of got to come out of it. And that was something Marcus taught me actually. When you're coming down as well, like try and bring it out and then surf around over the next one rather than trying to come down and then go over the top.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing heaps of. Like I was just getting super powered down, accelerate through the bottom of the wave and then accelerate over and then come down again. And that's where I'd make a mistake. So I'd do that a couple of times and then my legs just couldn't hold that finesse.
Oh yeah, and I guess that's the guy who likes to suffer and work hard in you. You love going up and over.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Marcus is I've always called him the turtle. You know, he's always going to find the easiest way to do it. He's going to glide around it, and you know, you and I know we've watched him downwind for years, and you know, he'll take the easy option. He's never going to paddle up and over something. He'll be like, oh, wait, let that one go. So it's,
the really good thing about Marcus was he's super patient, because I remember originally when I was starting out falling and I was like suffering and trying to like work this out, he'd like he could do it already, but he'd just wait for me. Yeah. And his like thought process was, well, if I can get other people to do it, then I've got other people to do it with. So I was like, oh, it's kind of cool that he actually spent the time to help me get it, because it was a frustrating process for me, because I knew I could do it, and then I'd get up and I'd just make so many mistakes. Like I'd fall like 100 times and I'd fall like 50 times and I was like 20, 10, and I was like, my goal was just to like not fall in a run sometimes. That was always the goal towards the end. I was like, if I don't fall, then I'll have a better experience. Even if I go like 2 seconds a kilometer slower,
doesn't matter. Yeah.
But it's just in my psyche, I always want to go as fast.
We all want to go fast. Yeah, that's the racer within us, and that's like I guess Marcus, and that's the opposite of Nathan, he's like, oh, I'm happy to fall. Like I'll just surf more. And I know Marcus has said to me, he's like, I don't understand what Nathan does. Like, what's he doing? He's turning, which is I think that's a really good way to, I guess, explain it. And I think the racing should be left to the racers, maybe. Like obviously training for races is great, but at the moment, like you said, there's not like there's a like one of the guys in France invited me to a SUP downwind foil event, and I was like, oh, well, lockdown, it's going to be hard. Greg Closier.
The Corsica? Corsica paddle trophy or something like that?
Could be, yeah.
I think they have like a SUP race in it, and they messaged me as well, but I definitely am not going because it's just
we're back here and home. Fortress Australia.
I'm not getting out of the Fortress again this year, that's for sure. But yeah, like if there is racing, because I know like in 2019 we were leading towards racing. I was talking, remember, to Tiesta, and I was like, okay, well, if there's a downwind race for up on one day and then a downwind race for the foil the next day, like I'll happily hang around and do it, because I'll be there. And yes, I'm not going to be the fastest guy, but it'll be fun. We're talking about doing prototypes of racing and like different ones with different conditions, and then it sort of just kind of fell away because it just was at that period where COVID kind of shut everything down.
Yeah, I'm glad that sort of discussions are happening. I'm hoping once COVID sort of becomes less of a roadblock that does happen. And what I'm worried about is that winging has become so big that the downwind sup foiling is probably just a minority. It's the wing events, like you'd be silly to run a downwind foil event and not a wing event, because how many downwind people are downwinding are actually going to be competing or entering, whereas a wing event, you're going to get probably hundreds to thousands if you can, put a good event together. Whereas I think a downwind sup event, I would say there's probably only, I'd be surprised if there are 1,000 people worldwide that would want to go to a downwind sup foil event at this stage anyway. And I guess one of the reasons I've started this podcast is to try to encourage more people to do the downwind foiling, and whether it be on a prone with if you've got a good course like they do in Oahu, or whether it's supping, or whether it's winging and doing the deflate or pack down, however you want to do it. So that's something that I'm passionate about, and I want that to be something that I want to go travel to races eventually one day, like a Molokai to Oahu. But like you, I would love for it to be a sup race on one day and then the downwind foil event on the next. I've been talking to the Molokai to Oahu guys and trying to persuade them to have it separate, because the Molokai to Oahu foil, while it's an epic course, the foil, it doesn't really make sense, because that last 3 kilometers is almost completely upwind. So anyone that would ever dream of doing that event would literally have to paddle in. Most people would have to paddle in, unless you're Kai Lenny, who pumps upwind with no waves. But literally, like, no one else was doing that.
Yeah, that was incredible to watch, actually.
Wasn't
that
it?
finish coming past poor was it Jeffrey?
Yeah, Jeffrey.
Poor guy.
Yeah, you probably paddled past him too. I paddled past him. He was just broken. And because did you see Kai go past you?
I didn't see Kai go past me. I saw some guy coming along the wall really quickly, and I think that probably was him. But no, we were a little bit wide. You were really wide.
I was really wide. We got so carried away in the race. Actually, why don't we talk about that? Because we haven't really had a good debrief on that. So Michael and I had an epic battle last time Molokai to Oahu was on, and unfortunately Travis had hurt his ribs, and Connor was competing in the Pan Ams. So it was kind of a 3-horse race between me, you, and Kenny, and it got within the first 10Ks. Kenny, you and I were all there, and then sort of in the middle, it was just this ding-dong battle. It was pretty epic. Thinking back, I'm like, man, I want another race like that. I'm getting tingles just thinking about it. And we both definitely went out too hard in hindsight. I think you were a little bit more too hard than I did. But yeah, so what do I want to say? That middle bit, like you got away from me, it was probably the 25 to 30, maybe even further, 35 kilometer mark, and you had a good lead on me. And I remember thinking, man, if I don't get back up to him here, I'm probably like done. And I'm not sure if you remembered that sort of section in the race where you had
for sure. I remember that race pretty well, because it was a race of attrition, because I don't think we were both really feeling very good. It was one of those races for me where I hadn't really had the best preparation, but it was just like, I want to go over there and compete, and I can't help myself. I've been going I was racing for Europe for like 2 months, and
that's right.
I flew straight to Hawaii, jumped on Unlimited, and tried to race 50 kilometers. And it was one of those times where you're like, okay, well, I kind of overestimated my capabilities at that point, because once I hit 30K, everything sort of fell apart. But I made huge mistakes in that race as well. Like, I didn't drink water till about 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like just simple stuff like that. Like, of course I'm going to fall apart. Like, I was cramping like uncontrollably, like the last 2 hours. And I just wanted to finish, because like my family was on the boat, and I was like, I can't not finish, but I really don't want to finish at this point. But I had to keep going. But I could tell that you were hurting as well. And you were I don't think you were falling. I think I was falling heaps. That was my issue. Once I started cramping, like I'd try and like hold my board up, and then I just like get one really big cramp. But yeah, we just went out way too hard for a race like that, and I learned the hard way what my capabilities were on that day, I think.
Yeah, you were the full-on rabbit that day. You took off, and I'm like, oh, all right, let's go, Boothie. Let's do it. And I was just like, I can't let him out of my sights. That was I'm like, I'll let him get ahead, but I don't want to let him get out of sight. And you went out too hard, mate.
Yeah, well, I think that was my strategy, because I knew I didn't have the kilometers in me. Like, I hadn't paddled 50 kilometers at any point that year. Like, I hadn't paddled even more than 20 kilometers that year. So, and then like when you're overseas, you can't really get more than like 40 to 50 Ks in a week if you're racing every weekend, you're traveling in between spots. So for me, it was kind of like almost like a mind game. I was just like, okay, well, if I can get out and just hurt him mentally, then maybe I could put doubts in his mind. Because obviously you trained specifically for that race. So me, I was like, if I can get out in front and put doubts in his mind that he is going to like suffer and not like sort of do as well. That was kind of like my tactic, but it failed. So the way it was, because I knew I couldn't get to the end like comfortably. Like I just
it was always going to be I feel like it was definitely, like as you said, battle of attrition. And within myself, I remember I'm like, I'll let him go because I don't want to, like, I know my capabilities and what I've trained for. And this speed is probably, it's too fast for me, but I want to stay within, like I said, that rubber band. You don't want to let that snap because then it's gone. And I remember thinking at one point, I'm like, man, that rubber band was nearly snapped. And I'm like, I've got to keep within reach here. And I think he might have had a fall and right in front of me. And he got back up and he caught the next bump and he went straight past me. And I'm like, I was cool with that. I remember in my head, I'm like, all right, that's all right. I know how much energy you've just spent to fall off, jump back on and go. And I'm like, he's ahead now, but I know that was a loss for him. Like it was in my head, which obviously,
and that was one of like 30 falls after that. Like
that was the only one I saw though. So I was like, within my head, I'm like, okay, that's his first fall. Maybe it's, and so. But I know at the end, obviously you said you were falling, but I didn't fall. My goal was to not fall in, not because I didn't want to fall in, but just as you get tired, it just takes up so much energy. So I was happy to go slower, and like you cramping, go slower to just reduce that energy. And towards the end, I know definitely you caught me back up. Whether you got a second wind or I was just broken by then, I'm not sure. All the line
I was really surprised. Yeah, I was really surprised because I was like finished. Like once I hit like maybe 2.5 hours, my race was over. It was just about getting to the end. And I remember seeing you up ahead, and I was like, I feel like I'm catching him. What's wrong with him? Like what's going on here? I'm finished. Like I can barely stand on my board. The worst bit was when I'd fall and I'd try and get back on, and like I'd put my arm on my board and that would cramp. And I was like, okay, if I can just get onto the board, then I'll cramp through my legs and I'll cramp through my abs. And then once I get paddling, I do like 5 strokes, I'll generally get rid of a lot of the cramps. But that was probably the hardest race I've ever done, and like a big mental achievement for me because I definitely didn't want to finish
that bad. And I think similar. I remember the first time I did Molokai on a stand up, or first time ever. It was the flat year in 2017, I think it was, or 2016, and so many people pulled out. And my first time, it was such a mission to get there, organizing a boat, accommodation, all of that. And I'm like, how are these people pulling out? Like, I think similar to you, the amount of time and effort for us Aussies to get over there and do it. I don't think there are many Aussies that are pulling out of those events because it's like, nah, I need to get across this finish line.
Well, and then you've spent, like, I know you did a lot of testing with your prototypes as well, and like I've flown over to Thailand earlier in that year to like design a board. I didn't have the time and effort to do the extent that you did, but I just basically got one chance to help design a board each year, and Starboard gave me that opportunity. And then we designed a good board for the following year as well, and I was like, yep, I'm going to train for it properly and do it, but didn't get that opportunity. So hopefully we can get back to it next year or the year after or something like that. I don't know, and just do that race again. And I'd like to see more people race on the subs. Like I know Unlimited's kind of fallen away because of all the other things coming in, but it's still something that in my and probably your eyes is something that is quite cool. And if that's enough, like you only need a couple of people to race.
Yeah, that's it. And even though there was basically that year was just you and I, that was plenty of people for me. Like I'd never been so close or in such a close battle mid-channel with anyone. Usually it's far more spread out, but we were sticking to each other that year, and it was thanks for the race, mate. That was epic. And
well, like at the end of the day, your competitors make your race. Like you have those stories and those experiences without your competitors, and like you learn to appreciate that a lot more, I think, as you get older. I think when you're younger, you're a bit more of like a young bull, and you're like, I hate everybody that I'm racing against. But as you get older, you sort of learn to appreciate those because you don't know how many more of those you're going to have.
That's it. Especially at the moment, we're sitting here in Australia, and Unlimited, it's become less and less. I think it's been a combination of the rise of the foil, but also, the winging and 14, it just gets a little bit too confusing with all the different divisions now. I know King of the Cut's probably been a good example of that. But like last year, how many unlimiteds? Like obviously it was just a local event last year, but how many unlimiteds were in the event?
I couldn't tell you, but I think there was only like 40 or 50 subs altogether. And obviously there was no international or domestic like travelers coming across. So,
yeah,
but I think there was definitely more like dings than there was stand-ups in that division. But if you're talking about stand-ups in general in Australia, I think there's just no real direction from anywhere. Like you've got the little clubs who sort of putting things together, but there's no pathway. That's what I keep speaking about. Like if you go to Europe, like world champs, 51 countries, 500 people turned up. Like every race you go to, you kind of almost, as an athlete, you feel like a celebrity in a way, because like you're signing autographs, you're getting photos non-stop. It sort of becomes too much after a period. But there's they're setting up clear pathways for athletes. They're setting up clear like club directions. They're setting up board sizes. Like it's really organized. Where here in Australia, I think because there's so many different sports, and Surfing Australia doesn't really care about the sport, and like Paddle Australia, I don't even know if they know SUP exists yet.
Yeah.
So like we're in a really weird spot. Like I have had conversations, but nothing's really come to fruition. And until that happens,
it's going to be the same limbo.
It's going to be the same. But like that's just the way it is. And I think it doesn't matter what it is. Like I think winging and downwind foiling as well, like won't really have any direction until someone actually creates some guidelines, creates a federation, creates clubs, like and creates like so when the juniors are coming through, like oh, I can do that because I can go to here and I can do the world championships. I can go here.
Like at the moment, like there's a few local groms who are paddling well and foiling well and winging well, but it's like they've got no direction. They're just sort of if Aussie titles for surf life savings on, they're going to go do that because that's something they can train towards, and there's a group of people doing it with them. Whereas for SUP in Australia, especially for the newer sports, foiling, winging, and SUP downwind, there's like, okay, well you can go do this, but it's kind of like you're doing it on your own, and you're not doing it with any mates. So how are you going to convince a 14, 15-year-old kid to come do SUP with me because there's this one event that you can race and win because there's no one else to race against. At the moment it's really weird.
Where does it fit? Like it doesn't, like you've got all these big clubs for surf lifesaving on like every beach in the country, and like I'd almost like to see those clubs become water sports clubs, but surf lifesaving kind of has a stranglehold on that junior sort of water sports development. I know surfing does a bit of stuff with their surfers and has some junior camps, that type of thing, but still
even
not.
Like I grew up surfing, and there wasn't really a good pathway for me either. Like I was shortboard surfing and motorboat board riders, and I won that a couple of times, and it wasn't a super competitive club, but because there was motorboat board riders didn't really compete in many of the surf tags or the local competitions. They didn't. While there is the pathways, they weren't pushing. It was more of a social club, I guess. And so because of that, I went full on into rugby because rugby was a pathway, Yeah. And then the only reason I ever got into stand up was because I went to Sunset and there was a APP World Tour, and I was like, oh well, that's my pathway, I guess. So I can go internationally and compete. But before that, in Australia, I was doing. There was nothing. Like that was just literally there was the odd event here and there, Marimbula. I think that was it, and then the local Sydney Paddle Surfing Club events. But there was nothing for SUP surfing or SUP racing that, from my knowledge, anyway. So that's something I guess maybe I'd love to see it grow. I'm not sure how you and I can probably help in some way, but I'm not sure how that is.
Yeah, I think it's something we've all got to work on and try and create. Like for me, in coming at like not to the end of my career, but like being someone who's been around for I guess 6 years in stand up now, which is kind of like a longer period, but obviously 2 of those years have probably not been much racing or anything like that. But you see that there needs to be more things going into place. But at the same time, nothing's really changed. Everyone always goes, oh, stand up's in like a bad place in Australia, but it's kind of the same spot it was in when I first started. Like
I think
you had your 12 hours, you had your King of the Cart. Like maybe there's less of the original people who were there, but most people do sport as like a hobby or a side thing to what they do with their work, because their work is their main part of life and they have their own families, and then they do a sport on the side. A lot of people change over their sports like every 5 years. Like you might have someone who focuses on dinging for 5 years, supper for 5 years. They might do surf ski, then they might do golf, or they might do, they have these different things, and it's all about that learning process. But because they have so much time focused on their work and their family life, they don't have a lot of time to focus on a sport, so they have to pick one every period. And once they get to a certain level, they've done our learning period that we might be able to do in 3 months, because we have that extra amount of allotted time that we can do because we're a bit more flexible. So yeah, like it's a weird one. And if suppy is going to go somewhere or foiling is going to go somewhere, it definitely needs the structure and organization, a federation to get those things going. It's just obvious.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see how, obviously the SUP in Australia develops, but also the foiling worldwide. And I think probably from our experience in SUP, I can't really see foiling in Australia all of a sudden becoming, a federation or a organised tour or anything. But, the downwind events, I think, will probably still go. WA is always going to be a place that people flock to for the Doctor and King of the Cut. 12 Towers is always going to be something, but, it's a nice local water sports event, I guess you'd call it, that people can flock to. But it'd be cool to have that sort of become a little bit more amalgamated and have a few more stops. And like Surf Life Saving has with, the Ironman series, it'd be cool to have that or like a more Waterman sort of series. That event we did up at Mooloolaba, something like that. Like I was chatting to Mick, I said, we need to add foiling into this. And he's like, I'm not sure how many people would be able to do it. But I'm like, I'm not sure how it is in WA, but when I walk along the beach here with my SUP or my surfboard, no one looks at me twice. If I walk along with a foil board, people stop you and say, how does that work? What is it? Is there a motor? And so people see it and they're really excited by it. I think that's something that foiling could really use to its advantage.
Yeah, well, I think that event on Mooloolaba was really a surf life saving event, and they were just trying to mix things up. So it was very much tailored towards the surf lifesavers, like even having the first 2 legs being board and swim, like we were pretty much knocked out.
I was done by the swim. I'm like white flag.
Yeah, I was middle of off season. Like I just done like a month off in Europe, like having a holiday.
I got 3 weeks notice, and I'm like, I'll start learning to paddle a ski.
It was great, but obviously it never happened again. The surf life saving community really kicked up a stink, but those type of events are the ones that are going to interest people, and hopefully things like that happen going forward. But yeah, there definitely needs to be plans put in place. I think it needs to come from a federation level to sort of set up different events, and even having like 3 major events a year. Like Stand Up has kind of like the 12 Towers, King of the Cut, and then a few different events.
Maybe,
like I think there's
maybe
a Clarence
the
and
third one.
Aussies, but like that doesn't really draw a lot of people because it doesn't really make sense to me. But you got to qualify. I was like, it doesn't. What are we doing that for? There isn't even that many people racing in Australia. Like, let's just have whoever wants to go.
Yeah, at least especially for the racing. Like obviously for the racing, it's got to be open slather for it to grow anyway. Otherwise, it's going to continue being this little niche event, which 20 people rock up to and race, which is kind of how it is at the moment.
Yeah, but I think it's just like there's not a lot of understanding about where you direct your comments to about how to make this better and who's actually interested in actually taking it to the next level here in Australia. Like at the moment overseas, the ICF is doing a lot of things. The ISA is doing nothing. But like going forward, who do we reach out to? Like at least with the ICF, we got people we can reach out to. Paddle Australia, not super clear on about who or like anyway. I don't even know if it's on their website. Like like they do post things about stand up paddling sometimes, but like I was the only Australian overseas in racing for Australia.
Yeah, did you get any
and there was
uniform
on the Paddle Australia?
Nothing.
I never got a uniform. I never got any support from them. So like you're representing this federation, which I don't, because I just represent my sponsors because they're the people who actually help me get around. If we're going to grow this sport, and it's got to come from the federation level, and hopefully something happens soon, because it's a good sport and it's something that a lot of people do. Like if you talk to people for stand up especially and for foiling, like these 2 sports, a lot of people are doing them, but there's clearly, like even for us, there's not a clear direction, and we're sort of at the forefront of it.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's something that I'm hoping for future generations. Like I don't want SUP to be a nothing sport, because when I'm older, I'll be like, I used to do this weird sport that no one does now. I want it to be something that grows to be something massive, and that's like Molokai to Oahu. I hope that continues to be this prestigious event. King of the Cut, I hope that grows to be something like Molokai to Oahu, because it is something that's cool and it's something that I'm proud of, and I'll be proud of it regardless, but I'd love to see it grow. And hopefully in the future, maybe you and I can help that grow somehow. And like, I'd love to, but like, I'm probably similar to you. I don't know how I can help at the moment with my other commitments, and whether a federation needs to reach out, or I don't know what. And but
absolutely. Well, if anyone's listening and wants to organize something or do something and make it work, like, you're always happy to listen. But at the end of the day, the people who are doing this stuff have to have it as a job. They have to be making money from it. Like, you can't have people doing things as volunteers and expect it to be amazing, because they can only give so much of their time, and they can only give so much to the sport that they love, and eventually it sort of wears you out. Like, you can't keep doing it because it's not bringing in any return for you. So
you can't do something for nothing. I think it's really interesting when you and I travel overseas, and there's Lincoln as well, and there's there was Bo O'Brien and Matt Nodditch, and there was quite a big Aussie contingent for a while there, and everyone's like, oh, Australia must be have such a good sup scene, and it's like, we're all the outcasts that like no longer wanted to do the main sports, and we're just doing this other this niche sport that in Australia, like, people, I'm sure it's the same for you sometimes. People, like, if you say you're going overseas to race on a stand-up, I remember the first time I said that to someone on a plane, they're like, you're racing on a stand-up? What a horrible thing to do. Like, why would you race? It's so peaceful to paddle a stand-up. And I'm like, the boards are a little bit different. It's more like a surf ski, and they just didn't get it. And it's such
nothing's changed.
Yeah, nothing's changed. It's actually probably, well, there's less Aussies racing overseas now. You're the only one at the moment. So hopefully in the future it does, something happens, and maybe for the downwind foiling, maybe that I'm a bit more optimistic for foiling in Australia at the moment, just because there is that, it's the beginning of the curve, whereas SUP, well, I don't think it's dying. I think it's plateaued. It's plateauing. So, and the fact that there is that wow factor with the foiling, maybe there'll be something that happens. But at the moment, I'm probably feeling like if any sort of foiling event does happen, it'll be a wing sort of sailing, sort of racing thing going on, which I've
seen that happening in Europe. Like, they've been doing like those sailing. I think they did one in Hood River as well, like a sailing race essentially. And they go back and forth. I think Fiona got second, and maybe Jeffrey won or something like that. So there are things happening in that realm. But it is interesting that I find this, like, even if you look back, stand-up paddlers are really like the early adopters, or this
absolutely
the culture, or even like the innovators. Like, they're the people who are like happy to jump on things and change, but they're the people who will quickly change to something else. You've like,
seen that,
and you've seen that happen quite drastically, like coming from 12 sixes to go to 14s to go to unlimited, and then picking up the foil, going downwinding on that, then doing the dinging, and then like, what's next for those people? Like, they're gonna keep changing. They're that type of thing. So whatever's next, I'll just do that one. So they're kind of the people you can't really base your, like, if you're really focused on stand up, you can't really base your opinions on those people. Or if you focus on foiling or downwind foiling, those people are going to change as well. So you've got to kind of find people who are fixed on that one and just kind of keep growing with it.
I think you nail on the head there. It has changed so much. Like, here in Sydney, we used to have a training group of probably 8 to 15 people that would do every Tuesday, Thursday morning, they'd be training. And now there's, I think, 3 people left, and the rest of the 10 or 12 are out on the SUP foil catching waves. And that's like, they're doing that every morning now, not just Tuesday, Thursdays. And the training group is, lucky to get 5 people most mornings, which is, whether it's a COVID thing, whether it's that change thing, whether it's because there's no races, I'm not sure what it is, but I'd like to, I kind of see the wing foiling as maybe a way that we can grow that foiling space, and then maybe get them to transition into, whether it be SUP foiling or like a Waterman's event somehow, like Hood River's done, I guess, is a good example of it.
Yeah, Australian market is just so different. I think the Australian market and the Hawaiian market are very similar. Like, they're kind of like innovators. They want to jump on new things, and they're very wind sport orientated. But the surprising thing, and I guess the cool thing about someone who does stand up like myself, I go to Europe and like, it's exploding over there. Like, it's just incredible what's happening over there for stand up paddling. And then I come back home and it's like, as you say, like 3 people going to sessions. Like, what's the difference? Like, why is it so?
I know,
such a difference. It's like 2 different worlds.
It is.
Like, even I think the US is starting to pick up stand up racing again. I'm just not sure if it's just because we're so used to being on the ocean and being around, like, and then because we live mainly on the coast, is that the major influence? like similar to Hawaii, you're on an island, like you're around the coastline all the time. So you do more wind and ocean orientated sports. Yeah, it's something that I can't really understand necessarily. Like I get it, but I also it's very, very challenging to try and work out what the next thing is for the sport here in Australia, because obviously like there's a lot of good athletes coming out of Australia for these sports, but not the direction, not the stoke that I'm seeing overseas.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, something that I guess Europe has always been, like, you look at windsurfing in Europe, it was probably a similar thing. Windsurfing in Europe was massive, but in Australia, I'm not sure it ever got to anything like the levels it was over there or in the US. So maybe it's that kind of the European culture. I guess it's just, it is different. And I guess there's less sports to I say less sports to compete with, less ocean or water sports to compete with over there is how I see it. And I actually haven't been to Europe since Denmark. So that's the only event that I've really even competed in over there. And I've got to get over for a Euro tour, but I see you dominate, and I'm like, we can have that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll have to go there
that's
eventually.
That's just where I've done a lot. Like I've done 5 years over there now, so that's kind of just where I kind of do most of my racing, because that's where most of the races are actually.
Yeah,
when you think
it's
about
so
it.
true. Yeah, like it's hard to, like, 2019. I think I did 3 races, like or maybe 4 races: M2M, M2O, King of the Cut, and 12 Towers. And I think you did all those races as well, except for M2M, but 20 others over in Europe. And so I'd done, 5 or 6 races, and you'd done and dominated in Europe. And I think that year was, I think I've said it to you before, but that was the year that I think I was the only person that had beat you every time, which isn't really something to be stoked about, because I just didn't compete against you in the things that you were training hard for. And I was different focuses, I guess. But you were doing everything.
Yeah, well, and then all the races that we raced on, I think, were unlimited as well. So it wasn't even like the same sport.
It was completely different.
You know, it's kind of the same, but it's kind of different. It's like doing dinging and doing downwind foiling or something similar. You know, like
it is different,
similar but not the same. So it was well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes.
I was stoked you were willing to compete in the stuff that I was focusing on, as well as the stuff that you were dominating on.
You kind of take those selfish things. Like I know that in like after Worlds, like I was so stoked that Titouan was willing to race next week in Montenegro, because it gave me an opportunity to race him, who's like the informed guy. Like, and that's what we sort of had a chat about it after the race. I was like, oh, thanks for racing, because
thanks for showing
it's like so good for me to be able to do that.
And for the sport, I think, the more people that enter races, is the better. I'm going to start wrapping up, but I think it's worth mentioning Noik as well. What a standout event he had at ICF. I was pretty proud of him. We've both seen him grow up, but obviously me being same, I guess, team Sonova with him, it was pretty cool to see him smash that out. He's a pretty passionate, he's a pretty funny fella, He's unique in probably every, he's got his tattoos, and I haven't seen him for a long time, but he's looking strong. Like, he looks like he's grown a bit, and he's got some guns.
It's great to see just the young contingent coming through, like with Noik and Clement, and I guess a few of the other guys. I think that's positive for the sport in general and in stand-up, because you've got that next generation coming through. Like, you don't want 30-year-olds like myself and yourself and Titouan and like Connor and Daniel, and those guys are getting like 28 now as well. So there hasn't really been anyone who's come through and threatened to win races. Like, you go to the whole season and there'd be like 5 guys who can actually win a race. Like, there'd be guys who can mix up the podium spots at the top 6, but to win, and then he sort of won in quite a dominant fashion. So it was good to see, because as you said, I went to New Caledonia back in 2013 or 14 and gave him his first board, like I was signing autographs with him. I stayed at his family house, and it's quite cool to see him progress into the person and the athlete he is, because he's quite a good guy as well. And we had a few beers after the race, and we had a good time. So it's just good. It's good to see some new blood, and it's a new challenge, I think, for all of us. So he's definitely the guy to beat. But when you look back at 2019, he was really surging in that year, and I kind of felt, I think I said it a few times, but I felt sorry for those guys who didn't get the opportunity as a young guy coming through to race in 2020 and 2021. I know he did a few events against Titouan over in France, but not having that level of competition that we sort of were allowed to have in those previous years.
Mm.
I think it's quite hard. And it's quite awesome to see like his mental strength and his
persistence,
resolve and persistence to come through and get those results. So all credit to him.
Yeah, it was really cool. I was very proud. Like you said, like kind of big brother. Like, you know, like I was similar thing. I went over to Newcastle and stayed at his family home, and it was he was very when the whole foiling stuff came through, I was always badgering him like, when are you going to learn to foil? No, like, you know, you live in Newcastle, epic downwind run, and he was like, no, not until I'm, you know, good enough on the SUP racing. And I'm like, you're already fast enough. You know, I was like sort of trying to get him to come to the dark side of foiling. But credit to him. He put in the hard yards, and I was stoked to see it.
Yeah, some very impressive performances.
Yeah, so I guess I want to thank you for coming on, Michael. It was good to catch up, and like I said, it's been 7 or 8 months since we saw each other last, and I was stoked to watch you compete overseas, and I want to see you do some more of the foiling when you get back home. Just relax a little bit, mate. Enjoy the downwinders.
Yeah. I'm sure I will. Once I hit December, January, when like I think there's a few races happening still in Perth, so I'll do the surf ski and the stand-up races, and I'm coaching a lot with Sereno Surf Club now, so that's sort of taking up a lot of my time. But I'll try and get into a few of the downwinders with Marcus and Nathan, and hopefully there's no weed this year. Hopefully we can get rid of the weed
factor. Weed gate. It's horrible.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah. But I guess hopefully with the fact you're coaching, maybe you can get some of those youngsters into stand-up and winging and foiling, and I don't know, I'm sure it is surf life saving, but you got a little bit of pull, I'm sure. So
the goal is to get some downwinders going. They haven't done many, so I'm planning to start to set up a couple of downwinds a week and get us doing different stuff that we haven't really done before. Yeah,
get that next generation of you know, ocean sports people coming through, because at the moment after us there's, I don't know, we're 30s, but below us, I feel like there's not many youngsters coming through in the SUP. And
well, the only one that's come through is Kalen this year. Like
that's true, actually. He's a beast.
He's obviously paddling super fast. I haven't raced him, obviously.
I can't wait till you race him, because I honestly think he's.
I reckon he'll give me a good run, and
I think you'll still have him in the bumps. He's got a bit to learn there, as you showed in 12 Towers.
12 Towers, he was a bit back, but I'm sure he'll improve. Like I feel like he's at a similar stage that I was at when I first came into SUP. I couldn't turn, I couldn't trim my board. I sort of knew what I needed to do, but I couldn't do it at the start. I knew how to paddle well, but it's one of those things. But Ty's obviously still there.
That's right as well. He's injured at the moment.
That MCL injury that we're talking about injuries, and he was surfing in Tori's MCL or ACL or something like that. So
and Nathan Cross as well. I guess I'm forgetting all those guys.
There's a few guys, and actually at 12 Towers, there's actually a pretty good turnout. Like I'd say that's probably one
Johnny
of
Hagan.
Strongest Australian fields that I've seen in a while. Like, because you got even like Jackson Cosgrove's coming. Like, he's been doing a fair few races. Obviously, we haven't really been able to see what all these guys are doing, but
that's exactly.
I reckon that top 10 at 12 Towers was
pretty competitive.
A solid Australian field. Yeah. And obviously Lincoln, but we're
I group Lincoln in with us is our sort of generation anyway, you know, because he was paddling, he's a bit younger than us, but he's been amongst it all with us at the same time. So it'd be cool to see how it all progresses. And thanks again for coming on, mate. And
no worries. Thanks for having me.
Be in touch soon.
All right, cheers, mate. See you later.